The champagne glass felt cold against my palm as I stood in the corner of my sister's engagement party, watching her hold court among Seattle's social elite. Madison Reynolds-Hart had always been the golden child, blonde, beautiful, and blessed. With the kind of effortless charm that opened doors and wallets with equal ease. "Oh, that's just my sister Emma," I heard her tell the assembled crowd, her voice carrying that particular tone she reserved for discussing inconvenient relatives. She's nobody really. Never amounted to much after high school." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The laughter that followed was polite but cutting. I took another sip of champagne, maintaining my practiced mask of quiet acceptance while mentally cataloging every face in the room. Old habits die hard, especially when those habits had kept me alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Syria. What Madison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that nobody had been my greatest asset for the past 15 years. Being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed as ordinary had been the perfect cover for extraordinary work. While she'd been climbing Seattle's social ladder, I'd been climbing mountains in Kandahar, leading special operations that would never appear in any public record. "Emma, darling." My mother's voice cut through my thoughts. Patricia Reynolds-Hart approached with her signature smile, warm for the cameras, cold around the edges for family. "Come meet Madison's future mother-in-law. Mrs. Whitman, this is my younger daughter, Emma." Mrs. Whitman extended a manicured hand, her eyes already dismissing me. "How lovely. And what do you do, dear?" The question I'd been dodging for years hung in the air. Around us, conversations continued about stock portfolios and charity galas while I stood there in my department store dress, looking every inch the family disappointment. "I work for the government," I said simply, watching her face shift to polite disinterest. "Oh, how nice. DMV or post office?" Before I could answer, Madison swept over, linking arms with her fiancé, Bradley Whitman III. Bradley was everything you'd expect from old Seattle money, handsome in that soft, privileged way, with the kind of confidence that came from never facing real consequences. "Emma works in filing, I think?" Madison's laugh tinkled like wind chimes. "She's always been the practical one in the family. Not everyone can be destined for greatness, right?" I nodded along, playing my role perfectly. Inside, I was remembering the weight of my sidearm during a night raid in Helmand Province, the responsibility of leading Delta Force operators through hostile territory, the presidential citation gathering dust in a safety deposit box 3 time zones away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "How wonderful that you have steady work," Mrs. Whitman said with the kind of patronizing kindness rich people reserved for the help. "Such an important backbone of society." The irony was delicious. While they discussed charity work and social climbing, I'd spent the last decade and a half actually protecting society. But my work existed in shadows and classified files, in operations that would never see headlines or receive public recognition. "Actually," Bradley chimed in, adjusting his Harvard tie, "I think it's admirable when people find their level. Not everyone can handle the pressure of real responsibility." Real responsibility. I thought about the 43 men and women under my command, scattered across 3 continents, each one trusting me with their lives. I thought about classified briefings in the Pentagon, about sitting across from generals and cabinet members while they hung on my every word, but here, in my sister's marble-floored living room, I was just Emma the nobody. "Speaking of responsibility," Madison announced, her voice rising to address the entire party, "Bradley and I have some exciting news to share." The room fell silent, glasses raised expectantly. Madison positively glowed as she took center stage. Exactly where she'd always belonged in our family dynamic. "Bradley's been selected for a very special position with the State Department," she continued, beaming with pride. "He'll be working on international security initiatives, very classified, very important work." The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. I felt my jaw clench slightly, knowing exactly what kind of classified work junior State Department appointees typically handled. Probably analyzing trade reports or attending diplomatic cocktail parties. "It's really quite an honor," Bradley said, puffing up with self-importance. Not many people get clearance for this level of international operations. I'll be advising on global security strategies. More applause. My mother was practically glowing with pride, finally, a son-in-law with real accomplishments to offset the embarrassment of having one daughter who'd never lived up to expectations. And the best part, Madison continued, squeezing Bradley's arm, is that his first assignment might take us to Washington, D.C. Can you imagine? We'll be right at the heart of everything important. Washington. The city where I'd spent countless hours in briefing rooms, where my recommendations had shaped policy and saved lives. Where my colleagues knew me not as Emma the Nobody, but as General Emma Reynolds, though even that name was known only to those with the highest security clearances. How exciting for you both, I said, raising my glass. International security. Work can be challenging. Bradley's chest puffed out further. Well, when you have the right training and connections, it's really about understanding the bigger picture. The global chess game, if you will. Most people can't comprehend the complexity. I nodded thoughtfully, remembering my last conversation with the Secretary of Defense about troop movements in Eastern Europe. I'm sure you'll learn a lot. Learn? Bradley laughed, the sound sharp with condescension. Emma, I'll be teaching others. This isn't some entry-level position. This is real policy work, real decision-making that affects nations. Around us, the crowd murmured approval. Here was a young man destined for greatness, unlike some people who were content with their small, insignificant lives. Of course, I agreed mildly. I'm sure your superiors will find your perspective valuable. Madison shot me a look, as if warning me not to embarrass the family with too many questions about subjects beyond my understanding. The same look she'd given me throughout childhood whenever I'd tried to contribute to conversations about anything more complex than household chores. The thing about international security, Bradley continued, clearly enjoying his captive audience, is that it requires a certain caliber of person. Someone who can think strategically, who understands military operations and diplomatic nuance. It's not for everyone. Military operations. I bit back a smile, remembering the planning session for Operation Silent Thunder, where I'd coordinated a multinational special forces operation that had successfully eliminated 3 terrorist cells without a single casualty. The mission had taken 8 months of planning and required approval from the highest levels of government. It sounds fascinating, I said. Have you had much exposure to actual military strategy? Bradley straightened his tie. Well, I did ROTC at Harvard. Plus, I've read extensively on the subject. Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, all the classics. Really? It's about understanding human nature and geopolitical dynamics. Harvard ROTC and classic military texts. I nodded respectfully while thinking about the scars hidden beneath my sleeve, souvenirs from missions where academic theory met brutal reality. The party continued around us, conversations flowing about summer homes and yacht clubs while I maintained my position in the shadows. It was a skill I'd perfected over the years, being present but invisible, observing everything while revealing nothing. Emma's always been such a good listener, my mother said to Mrs. Whitman. She's very quiet. Keeps to herself, you know. Some people are just more suited to simple lives. Simple lives. If they only knew about the complexity of coordinating joint operations between CIA, NSA, and military intelligence. If they understood the weight of decisions that could shift the balance of power in entire regions, but they didn't know, and that was exactly how it needed to be. As the evening wore on, I found myself studying the guests with professional interest. Old habits from threat assessment training never fully disappeared. I noted exit routes, potential weapons, the way certain guests clustered around Bradley and Madison while others remained on the periphery. It was during this casual reconnaissance that I spotted him, a man in his 50s standing near the bar, his posture unmistakably military despite his civilian clothes. He was scanning the room with the same systematic attention I'd been using, his eyes pausing fractionally longer on certain guests. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw a flicker of recognition in his gaze. Not personal recognition, we'd never met, but the kind of professional acknowledgement that passed between people who'd walked similar paths. He excused himself from his conversation and began moving through the crowd toward me. My pulse quickened slightly. This could be problematic. "Excuse me," he said when he reached me, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I don't believe we've been introduced. Colonel Marcus Webb, retired." I shook his hand, noting the firm grip and calluses that spoke of hands-on military experience. "Emma Reynolds. Nice to meet you." His eyes sharpened slightly at my name, and I realized he was connecting dots I'd prefer remain unconnected. This was exactly the kind of encounter I'd tried to avoid by maintaining my low profile. "Reynolds," he repeated thoughtfully. "Are you by any chance related to the Reynolds who's been making waves in the Pentagon lately?" My blood ran cold. I kept my expression neutral, but inside alarms were blaring. How much did he know? How much could he know? "I'm not sure I follow," I said carefully. Colonel Webb studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his next words. Around us, the party continued, Madison's laughter rising above the general conversation as she regaled another group with stories of her upcoming wedding. "Perhaps I'm mistaken," he said finally, but his tone suggested he wasn't mistaken at all. "Though I have to say, there's something remarkably familiar about you. Have you ever been to the Pentagon?" The question hung between us like a landmine. One wrong step could expose everything I'd worked so carefully to protect. My family's ignorance of my real life wasn't just about avoiding their judgment, it was about operational security, about protecting both them and my work from potential threats. "I think you might have me confused with someone else," I said, with a small smile. "I'm just here for my sister's engagement party." Before Colonel Webb could respond, Bradley appeared at my elbow, slightly drunk and supremely confident. "Colonel Webb. Fantastic to see you again. I trust you've met my future sister-in-law? Emma here works for the government, filing or something like that." The dismissal in his voice was casual and complete. To Bradley, I was background noise, hardly worth acknowledging except in passing. But I caught the way Colonel Webb's eyebrows rose slightly at this characterization. "Filing," he repeated slowly, his gaze moving between Bradley and me. "Important work, of course," Bradley continued with the magnanimous condescension of someone secure in his superiority. "We all need people to handle the paperwork while others focus on the real strategic work." I watched Colonel Webb's expression carefully. He was military enough to recognize the value of operational security, but I could see curiosity warring with professional discretion in his eyes. "Indeed," he said simply. "The devil is often in the details." Madison joined our small group, slipping her arm through Bradley's. "Are you gentlemen talking shop? Bradley's going to be doing such important work in Washington. International security, very hush-hush." "So I understand," Colonel Webb said, his attention focused entirely on Bradley. "Now, and what's your background in international operations, Mr. Whitman?" Bradley preened under the attention. "Well, extensive academic preparation, of course. Harvard, then specialized study in strategic planning and diplomatic relations. I've been selected for a position that requires top-level security clearance." "Impressive," Colonel Webb said dryly. "And your military experience?" "ROTC, naturally. Plus extensive theoretical study. In today's world, strategic thinking is more important than mere tactical experience." Mere tactical experience. I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. The kind of tactical experience that involved rappelling from helicopters under enemy fire, that required split-second decisions with lives hanging in the balance, that demanded the ability to adapt when carefully laid plans crumbled under the chaos of real combat. But I said nothing, maintaining my role as the quiet sister who worked in filing. "Theoretical study certainly has its place," Colonel Webb agreed, though I caught the subtle skepticism in his tone. "Though I've always found that real-world experience tends to illuminate the gaps in academic preparation." Bradley either missed or ignored the implied criticism. "Of course, but in my position, I'll be working at a level where strategy and policy matter more than ground-level tactics. It's about seeing the bigger picture." As he spoke, I noticed Colonel Webb's attention shift back to me. There was something calculating in his gaze, as if he was working through a puzzle whose pieces weren't quite fitting together. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Bradley holding forth on international relations while Madison gazed at him adoringly. I contributed only occasional murmurs of agreement, playing my part perfectly, but when the group finally dispersed, Colonel Webb lingered, pretending to examine the artwork on the nearby wall while clearly waiting for a private moment. "Ms. Reynolds," he said quietly when we were alone, "I hope you'll forgive an old soldier's curiosity, but I have the strongest feeling we should talk." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice level. "I'm not sure what we'd have to discuss." He glanced around, confirming we weren't being overheard. "Perhaps we could step outside for some air? The conversation in here seems to be getting rather theoretical." The emphasis on the last word told me everything I needed to know. Somehow, despite all my precautions, he'd figured out that I was more than just Emma the filing clerk. The question now was what he intended to do with that knowledge. "I think I'll stay inside," I said carefully. "But thank you for the suggestion." Colonel Webb nodded slowly, understanding passing between us. "Of course. Though if you ever find yourself in Washington, I'd be very interested in continuing our conversation. I suspect we might have more in common than first appears." With that cryptic comment, he moved away, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the growing certainty that my carefully constructed cover was beginning to crack. Around me, the party continued, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents swirling beneath the surface of polite society conversation. Madison was still holding court, still glowing with pride over Bradley's prestigious appointment, still secure in her position as the family success story, but something had shifted tonight. Colonel Webb's recognition, however limited, was a reminder that the two halves of my life were never as separate as I liked to pretend. And with Bradley heading to Washington, to the same city where my real identity existed in classified files and secure briefing rooms, the careful balance I'd maintained for years was about to become much more precarious. I finished my champagne and prepared to make my excuses, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and complications. Tonight had been supposed to be a simple family obligation, a few hours of playing the disappointed sister before returning to my real life. Instead, it had become the beginning of something much more complex, something that would force me to choose between the protective anonymity I'd cultivated and the truth I'd hidden for so long. As I gathered my coat and prepared to leave, I caught Madison's voice one more time, carrying clearly across the room. "Really, I feel so sorry for Emma. Sometimes she tries, you know, but some people just aren't meant for anything important. At least she seems content with her little life." Content with my little life. If only she knew that my little life included the Medal of Honor citation locked away in my safety deposit box, awarded for actions so classified that even the ceremony had been conducted in secret, but she didn't know. And perhaps it was better that way, for now, 3 weeks after Madison's engagement party, I was back where I belonged, in the Pentagon's most secure briefing room, surrounded by maps of Eastern Europe and satellite imagery that told stories the public would never hear. My uniform bore the 3 stars of a lieutenant general, though in these classified circles, rank mattered less than results. "General Reynolds," Secretary of Defense Harrison said, sliding a folder across the polished table. "We have a situation developing in the Baltic. I need your assessment." I opened the file, scanning the intelligence reports with practiced efficiency. Russian troop movements near the Estonian border, unusual communications patterns, supply convoys that didn't match official deployment records. The kind of shadows that preceded very loud storms. "Timeline?" I asked, already formulating response scenarios in my head. 72 hours, maybe less. The president wants options that don't involve tanks rolling through Tallinn. I nodded, my mind shifting into operational mode. This was why I existed in the shadows, to solve problems that couldn't be solved with conventional thinking or traditional military responses. Problems that required someone willing to operate in the gray spaces between diplomacy and warfare. My secure phone buzzed. Madison's name appeared on the encrypted display, and I frowned. She never called during the week, and certainly never during business hours. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but family emergencies had a way of demanding attention at the worst possible times. "Excuse me," I said to the room. "Family emergency." I stepped into the secure corridor and answered. "Madison? Emma? Thank God." Her voice was tight with panic, tears evident even through the encrypted connection. "I need your help. Something terrible has happened." My training kicked in automatically: threat assessment, priority evaluation, resource allocation. "Are you hurt? Are you safe?" "I'm safe, but, oh God, Emma, I've ruined everything. Bradley's career, our engagement, everything. I don't know what to do. Through the briefing room's reinforced glass, I could see the secretary checking his watch. Russian troops didn't wait for family drama, but the desperation in Madison's voice triggered protective instincts that ran deeper than any military oath. Tell me what happened. It's so stupid, she sobbed. I was at lunch with some of Bradley's new colleagues, the wives and fiancés of the important State Department people. They were talking about security clearances and classified work, and I said some things I shouldn't have. My blood chilled. What kind of things? Just gossip, really. About Bradley's work, about some of the things he'd mentioned at home. I thought it was harmless, just girl talk about how important our husbands' jobs were. But one of the women, Emma, she reported it to security. The secure corridor suddenly felt smaller. In the world of classified information, there was no such thing as harmless gossip. Lives, operations, and national security could hinge on details that seemed insignificant to civilians. Where's Bradley now? In meetings all day. Emergency meetings. His supervisor called him in this morning, and he hasn't answered his phone since. Emma, what if they fire him? What if this ruins his entire career? I closed my eyes, seeing the domino chain already in motion. Security violations in Bradley's position wouldn't just mean termination, they meant investigations, background checks on everyone connected to him, scrutiny that could expose secrets I'd spent 15 years protecting. Madison, I need you to listen carefully. Don't discuss this with anyone else. Don't post anything on social media. Don't even talk to Mother about it. Can you do that? But what am I supposed to do? How do I fix this? Before I could answer, the briefing room door opened and Colonel Sarachan emerged, her expression grim. General, we need you back inside. The situation just escalated. I looked between the phone and my colleague, feeling the weight of divided loyalties. Madison, I have to go. We'll talk tonight. Emma, please. You work for the government, there must be something you can do, someone you can talk to. I know. It's not much, your filing job, but maybe you know someone who knows someone. The irony was suffocating. Here I was, one of the most senior military officials in the country, being asked by my sister to use my non-existent connections to help fix a security breach. If she only knew that I was probably going to be briefed on Bradley's case before the day was over. I'll see what I can do, I said, the lie tasting bitter of back in the briefing room. The situation had indeed escalated. New satellite imagery showed Russian mechanized units moving toward forward positions, and communication intercepts suggested something was planned for the next 48 hours. General, the secretary said as I took my seat, I'm authorizing Operation Silent Guardian. You'll have full operational authority and whatever resources you need. Operation Silent Guardian, a contingency plan I developed for exactly this scenario. It would require deploying assets across 3 countries, coordinating with allied intelligence services, and orchestrating a response so precise that it would stop Russian aggression without giving them an excuse to escalate. I'll need 12 hours for positioning, I said, already running calculations. And I want Colonel Webb as my liaison with NATO Command. The mention of Webb's name sparked a memory, the recognition in his eyes at Madison's party, the careful way he'd probed about my identity. If he was going to be part of this operation, my cover would become even more precarious. Done. Colonel. Webb is already en route. He specifically requested assignment to this operation when he heard you were leading it. Over the next several hours, I immersed myself in the complex choreography of international crisis management. Secure communications with allied commanders, real-time intelligence analysis, tactical positioning of special operations assets, the kind of work that required absolute focus and split-second decision-making, but throughout it all, part of my mind kept circling back to Madison's call. Bradley's security violation would trigger an investigation that could reach into every aspect of his life, including his family connections. How long before investigators started asking questions? About his fiancée's sister? How long before someone noticed that Emma Reynolds, the filing clerk, had the same name as Lieutenant General Emma Reynolds? My secure phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Admiral Hayes, head of military intelligence, need to brief you on a related security matter. Your office, 1900 hours. My stomach dropped. In my world, related security matters during active operations usually meant something had gone very wrong. And given the timing, I had a sinking feeling it was connected to Bradley's situation. At exactly 1900 hours, Admiral Hayes appeared in my office, flanked by two officials I didn't recognize but whose bearings screamed federal investigation. General Reynolds, Hayes said, his tone carefully neutral, "These are Special Agents Morrison and Chen from the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. They need to ask you some questions about a potential security breach." My training took over completely. Face neutral, posture relaxed, mind cataloging every detail while revealing nothing. "Of course. How can I help?" Agent Morrison consulted his tablet. "We're investigating a series of security violations involving classified information that was disclosed in a social setting. The individual responsible is Bradley Whitman III, currently assigned to the State Department's International Security Division." I nodded appropriately, as if hearing this name for the first time in a professional context. "Mr. Whitman is engaged to a Madison Reynolds-Hart," Agent Chen continued, watching my face carefully. "We understand you share the same last name. Are you related?" The moment I'd been dreading for 15 years had finally arrived. I could lie, maintain my cover, and hope they didn't dig deeper. Or I could trust that my decades of service and impeccable record would protect me. "Madison is my sister," I said calmly. Both agents leaned forward slightly. "General, were you aware of Mr. Whitman's security clearance status when you met him?" "I met him briefly at my sister's engagement party 3 weeks ago. At that time, I was not operating in any official capacity, nor was I privy to details of his professional assignments." Agent Morrison made notes on his tablet. "Did Mr. Whitman discuss his work during this meeting?" I thought carefully about how to answer. The truth was that Bradley had boasted extensively about his classified work, but in a way that revealed his fundamental ignorance about actual security protocols. Mr. Whitman mentioned that he was starting a position with the State Department. He seemed enthusiastic about the role. Did he provide any specific details about classified projects or operations? No. This was technically true. Bradley had provided no actual details, only vague bragging about his importance. Agent Chen exchanged glances with her partner. "General, we need to ask directly, has your family relationship with Mr. Whitman compromised your security clearance in any way?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. They were asking whether I could be trusted, whether my family connections made me a liability. It was exactly the scenario I'd spent years trying to avoid. "Agent Chen," I said, letting authority creep into my voice, "I've held the highest levels of security clearance for 15 years. I've led operations in theaters where operational security meant the difference between life and death for American service members. My personal relationships have never compromised my professional obligations." Admiral Hayes cleared his throat. "Agents, General Reynolds is currently leading Operation Silent Guardian. Her operational security record is beyond reproach." "We understand that, Admiral," Agent Morrison said. "But the investigation into Mr. Whitman has revealed some concerning patterns. His fiancée disclosed classified information to foreign nationals." My blood chilled. Foreign nationals? One of the women at the lunch was married to a Russian cultural attaché. Another was connected to Chinese trade representatives. Information that Mr. Whitman shared with his fiancée was subsequently passed to individuals with potential intelligence connections. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a case of careless gossip, it was a potential espionage situation. And my sister was at the center of it. "General," Agent Chen said quietly, "we need to know, did your sister ever ask you about your work? Did she show unusual interest in your government connections?" I thought about Madison's call earlier, her desperate plea for me to use my government connections to help Bradley. How many times over the years had she made similar requests, assuming I had no real influence but hoping I might know someone who did? "My family believes I work in a low-level administrative position," I said carefully. "They have no knowledge of my actual role or clearance level." Both agents sat back, processing this information. The idea that a 3-star general had successfully hidden her identity from her own family for over a decade was clearly not something they'd anticipated. "General," Admiral Hayes said, "given the security implications, we need to consider whether your cover can be maintained. If this investigation expands, your family connections will be scrutinized extensively. I understood what he was really saying. The careful balance I'd maintained for years was collapsing. Soon, I'd have to choose between my family and my career. Between protecting them and protecting national security. My secure phone buzzed again. Madison, calling for the third time. This time, I had to answer, but not as her sister, as the officer investigating her case. "Excuse me," I said to the room, then stepped into my private office and activated the secure recording system. "Madison? Emma, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day. Something terrible has happened. They arrested Bradley." Arrested. The investigation had moved faster than I'd expected. "What are the charges?" "Espionage. Can you believe it? They're saying he sold secrets to foreign agents, but that's impossible. Bradley would never." "Emma, you have to help me. I know you don't have much influence, but please, there must be something." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of years of deception pressing down on me. "Madison, where are you right now?" "At the police station. They want to question me too, but I haven't done anything wrong. I just talked to some friends about how proud I was of Bradley's work." "That's not illegal, is it?" Through my office window, I could see Agent Morrison receiving a phone call, his expression growing more serious as he listened. The investigation was expanding in real time. "Madison, I need you to listen very carefully. Get a lawyer. Don't answer any more questions without legal representation present. And whatever you do, don't mention our conversation today." "But Emma, I don't understand what's happening. They keep asking about my family, about whether anyone in my family works for the government." I told them you do filing work, but they seemed very interested in that. "They asked for your full name and where you work." My heart stopped. "What did you tell them?" "Just that your name is Emma Reynolds and you work somewhere in the federal government." "Was that wrong?" "Emma, why would they care about your filing job?" Before I could answer, there was a knock on my office door. Agent Chen appeared, holding a tablet with what looked like arrest warrants. "General," she said quietly, "we need to talk." I looked at the phone, then at the agent, understanding that the moment of revelation was finally at hand. For 15 years, I protected my family by keeping them ignorant of my real life. Now their ignorance was about to destroy everything I'd built. "Madison," I said into the phone, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind, "I'm going to help you. But first, there's something you need to know about your filing clerk sister." 2 hours later, I sat across from Madison in a secure federal facility, watching her world reshape itself around truths she'd never imagined. The woman who'd called me nobody was struggling to process that her insignificant sister was one of the most senior military officers in the country. "I don't understand," she kept saying, staring at my uniform with its 3 stars. "This is impossible. You're Emma. You work in filing." "Madison," I said gently, "I've been General Emma Reynolds for 12 years. I've commanded special operations across 4 continents. The Medal of Honor citation in my safety deposit box is real. The filing job was a cover story to protect both my work and our family." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "But why? Why lie to us for so long?" "Because the moment you knew the truth, you became a security risk. And because I knew that if our family understood what I really did, they'd never let me do it safely." Agent Morrison entered the room, his expression softer than it had been earlier. "Ms. Reynolds-Hart, we've completed our initial interview with Mr. Whitman. He's confirmed that he disclosed classified information to you, and that you shared it with others." Madison's face crumpled. "I didn't know it was classified. He just talked about his work like any husband would. I thought I was supporting him by showing how proud I was." "The information you shared has been traced to at least 3 foreign intelligence contacts," Agent Chen added, joining us at the table. "This is a serious situation." I looked between my sister and the agents, then made a decision that would change everything. "Agents," I said, standing and letting my authority fill the room, "I want to make a proposal." Both agents straightened, recognizing the shift in my tone. "My sister made a mistake, but she's not a spy. She's a civilian who was manipulated by someone who should have known better. Bradley Whitman violated his oath and endangered national security by discussing classified material with unauthorized personnel. General, Agent Morrison said carefully, what are you proposing? Full cooperation. My sister will provide complete testimony about every conversation, every detail she can remember. In exchange, you focus the investigation where it belongs. On the person who actually had access to classified information. Madison looked up at me with wonder and terror. Emma, what does this mean for Bradley? I met her eyes, seeing for the first time not the golden child who dismissed me all our lives, but a frightened woman who'd finally discovered that her nobody sister was the most powerful person in the room. It means Bradley's career is over, I said honestly. It means he'll face federal charges. And it means that our family's life is about to change dramatically. The next several hours passed in a blur of interviews, statements, and legal procedures. Madison provided detailed testimony about every conversation she could remember, while federal agents built their case against Bradley and began damage assessment on the leaked information. As dawn broke over Washington, I found myself sitting in my Pentagon office, still wearing yesterday's uniform, watching news feeds that would soon report the arrest of a State Department official for espionage. Operation Silent Guardian had been successfully concluded during the night. Russian forces had withdrawn after a series of precisely coordinated diplomatic and military signals that convinced them their plans had been compromised. My secure phone rang. Madison. Emma? I mean, General Reynolds? I don't know what to call you anymore. Emma is fine, I said, exhaustion creeping into my voice. How are you holding up? I've been thinking all night, she said quietly. About all the times I called you nobody. About all the ways I dismissed you and looked down on you. God, Emma, you must have thought I was such a fool. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Washington skyline. Madison, I never wanted you to feel foolish. I wanted you to be safe and happy. That's why I kept the secret. But I wasn't happy, she said, surprising me. I was trying so hard. To be important, to matter, to impress people who turned out to be shallow and empty. And you were actually important, actually making a difference, and I treated you like you were nothing. Through my office window, I could see the early morning shift arriving, analysts and officers who worked in shadows to keep the world stable. People like me, who chose duty over recognition, service over status. Madison, I said gently, importance isn't about who knows your name or how impressive your title sounds. It's about the work you do and the people you help. You were never nobody, you just measured yourself against the wrong standards. She was quiet for a long moment. What happens now? Will you have to disappear again? Will I lose my sister all over again? I thought about Admiral Hayes' words, about the investigation that would scrutinize every aspect of my family relationships. The careful compartmentalization that had protected my dual life was gone forever. But perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. No more secrets, I said finally. No more pretending to be somebody I'm not. But Madison, this means your life changes. Too. You'll be the sister of a senior military officer. There will be scrutiny, security protocols, limitations on your travel and associations. I understand, she said. And Emma? I'm proud of you. I'm ashamed it took all this for me to see it, but I'm proud to be your sister. For the first time in years, that feeling was mutual. 6 months later, I stood in my mother's garden, watching Madison help serve at a charity fundraiser for veterans' families. She'd thrown herself into the work with the same intensity she'd once devoted to social climbing, but now her efforts served people who genuinely needed help. Bradley had pled guilty to multiple security violations and received a 5-year federal sentence. Madison had filed for divorce and returned to school to study social work, determined to rebuild her life around purpose rather than prestige. My mother still struggled with the reality of having a 3-star general for a daughter, but she'd begun referring to me as my daughter Emma rather than poor Emma in social situations. And me? I was still General Reynolds, still leading operations that would never make headlines, still working in shadows to keep the world stable. But now I could do it without the exhausting weight of living a double life. General? Colonel Webb approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Over the months since Operation Silent Guardian, he'd become both a trusted colleague and, surprisingly, a good friend. Just Emma today, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Your sister's doing good work here, he observed, watching Madison organize volunteers with military-like precision. She's got natural leadership abilities. I smiled, remembering all the times Madison had effortlessly commanded social situations while I lurked in corners. Perhaps we'd both been using our talents in the wrong places. She's learning that being important and being significant are very different things, I said. As the afternoon wound down, Madison approached us, her face glowing with the satisfaction of productive work rather than social achievement. Emma, she said, then caught herself. General Reynolds. The veterans advocate said the fundraiser exceeded all expectations. Apparently having a real general's endorsement made all the difference. It wasn't my endorsement that made the difference. I corrected her. It was the work you put in, the way you organized everything, the heart you brought to it. That's what real importance looks like. She smiled, and for the first time in our adult lives, it was a smile of genuine contentment. Rather than performance. You know, she said, for years I thought you were nobody. Turns out I was nobody, and I just never knew it. You were never nobody, I replied, meaning it completely. You just needed to find the right place to be somebody. As the sun set over the charity event, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. A security breach that should have destroyed my career had instead freed me from the prison of secrecy I'd built around myself. My sister's fall from social grace had become her rise to actual significance. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving your worth to people who dismissed you. Sometimes it's helping them discover their own worth along the way. After all, true strength isn't about holding secrets or maintaining facades. It's about knowing who you are and what you stand for, whether anyone else recognizes it or not. And in the end, we'd both learn that lesson the hard way. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.